And my name is Mark Daniels. I am the chairman of the Liquor Licensing Authority, and I have Mr. Anthony Santucci present with me, who is the head of CADA, and he's a serving member on our authority and is of great assistance to me and our fellow colleagues. So effectively, today's presentation is really just to talk about the current changes to the Liquor Licensing Act and to highlight the opportunities that exist right now for Bermudians and residents within Bermuda. So effectively, the role has changed somewhat because this was formerly held by the senior magistrate, and the learned AG had felt it necessary to look at amending the Liquor Licensing Act and to try and bring it into the 21st century. So effectively, there's a lot going on in terms of constant changes, and we certainly are a very welcoming body, I think, in terms of trying to receive feedback from the community as to what's best to try and meet their goals, and then we can be a conduit to the minister to provide the minister with necessary updates or recommendations that will make this a better service to all. And so, for example, previously, the way that this operation was set up was, I think, a bit more rigid in some regards, whereas the way that we've been invited to operate the authority is with a very clear path of looking for economic opportunity and to try and assist Bermudians who wish to pursue economic opportunities with the use of alcohol sales and products, while also trying to find the balance and making sure that the health and safety components are fully met. So we work with the police, and the police are the individuals right now who have been doing much of the policing or following up with various license holders to make sure that they're operating within the context of their license and the conditions of their licenses. We don't really function at this stage as a body that seeks to take action against license holders. The most that we would look to do at this particular stage is assess the suitability of individuals at a subsequent application hearing. So, for example, some individuals may have seen in the past there have been certain establishments that have been shut down, and those establishments were shut down based on the police and the determinations made by the police. In our context, what we're really interested in doing is trying to be a source of information and guidance for, as I said, individuals who are looking to create certain business opportunities. And so with that, we have different types of licenses that are available to potential operators. And that will range from everything from within the tourism sector to hotel licenses, restaurant licenses, as well as bar licenses, etc. Tourboat licenses. And what we started to see more recently with the advent of Sargasso and other delivery options is certain entities that are looking to have Class A licenses, which enables an entity to basically acquire alcohol and then sell alcohol, and then for those entities to be able to do so lawfully, and then even with the delivery services. So right now, that is definitely a function that is starting to take and pick up a bit with regard to opportunities. One challenge that we're seeing, however, is there is, because of the economic challenges, various entities are looking to create alcohol products. And so we're very much aware of certain products that are on the pipeline from social media that are advertised. Regrettably, a lot of those businesses or entrepreneurs have not yet registered with the authority. And so for those businesses that are advertising via social media and the like, we have taken we've documented those entities that are selling alcohol products but are doing so without licenses. Now, one of the approaches is, and I can say that the police are certainly aware of those entities as well. One of the processes that we work with, though, is not to be heavy-handed and punitive, but to try and assist. So, for example, Bermuda with Swizzle is a lot of Bermudians are looking, who have always traditionally made Swizzle, whether it's to give away to friends or whether it's to sell as a little side hustle. What we're really trying to encourage is the development of good quality standards that would enable the product, one, to be legitimated, but also really to think bigger picture, because at this particular stage, a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at Swizzle and certain types of alcohol-infused fruit drink products as a means of making a quick dollar. What we would be more interested in, because we do have some license holders who are looking to go a lot larger and international, is if we can try and take such a product and bring it up to a grander scale such that we're able to promote this as part of our tourism package and basically promote our Bermudian entrepreneurs on a larger scale than just the local market. And so from our standpoint, that's something that we want to work with Bermudians and residents who are interested in capitalizing on those opportunities, whether it is specifically with Swizzle or whether it is with other types of cocktail concoctions. But at this stage, most entities that are going that route have not met certain health and safety requirements. And of course, that opens themselves up to potential risks because, with some of the loopholes that do exist, there's opportunity for people either to get sick, and there's opportunity for potential lawsuits and the like. And so we want to try and make sure that we're not seeing individuals fall into those type of categories that would be a detriment to them in the past. Now, forgive me, I think I just saw some kind of hand motion pop up. I'm not sure if that was meant to be a question or somebody was asking something in particular.
No,
don't think so yet. Okay. So I'm not sure if you heard that from Mr. Santucci. She is close by, but if there's any questions at this particular point, please put in the chat so that we can try and canvass it. I want to make sure that this is more geared towards answering questions that participants may have, as opposed to trying to just give some kind of directive as things stand. So looking at what opportunities are available, obviously we have the special event licenses and tourism event licenses, and those were tailored specifically for entities that were looking to try and capitalize on one-off or short-term events, let's say over the period of a weekend and things of that nature. So that's something that's available to entities to try and build as a further opportunity or revenue stream. And so that's something that was not available before the amendments were made to the particular legislation. And in terms of what we're seeing as well with the downturn with tourism and other economic opportunities is a lot more creativity. So there have been, for example, an applicant who is looking at, because I always used to wonder to myself, how come we don't have like certain snowball stands that might sell alcohol-infused snowballs and the like? Well, we are seeing more and more entities that are looking at alcohol-infused products, whether they're frozen fruit products, popsicles, etc., that are now coming into line. And so those entities have been looking at getting licenses so that they can try and get their products on a different level and push it to a further audience, and then get more ties with other business opportunities. For example, the Goslings and the like have agreed with certain entities to try and help push certain products. And that's all because of the way that the Liquor Licensing Authority is trying to work with partners effectively to assist. So again, I say it's a bit strange looking at myself and just talking. Mrs. Santucci, I do see this little hand popping up.
I see a hand popping up as well. Click to see. I'm going to assume, Chair, that that's actually Sabrina.
Yeah.
And that is there, and everybody else in mic is there.
All right. It doesn't appear that this question is being posed yet.
No.
All right.
And I'm assuming you can go better.
So what I'm going to do for a moment is just defer while I'm just trying to look at some of the details. I know that he certainly brings
Nothing there yet.
question. What's this?
No,
Okay, yeah, so we're starting to see some questions coming in. So how can we, this question, forgive me. Yeah, this is not my, I wanted to see who made the question. I think the last name's Lodge. Maybe that's just coming from. How do you determine what is the right structure for your business was one of the questions. So again, in terms of structures, that's going to come down to, I mean, if you're talking about incorporations versus just trading as type businesses, it really comes down to your risk appetite. And so, for example, a lot of entities are going to say to themselves, the cost of incorporating a business is about $4,000, give or take. Could be higher with some firms, could be a little bit less, but that's kind of the ballpark figure. So from a starting point, you might say, do I want to incur that as an additional cost to a startup business? Or am I confident that I can execute while mitigating my risk sufficiently? And so from our standpoint, we don't use the legal status as to whether an entity is incorporated versus whether the person is fit and proper, which is what the legislation requires us to consider. And so one of the questions would be, what does a fit and proper person look like? It really comes down to the way in which you approach the business model. So as the law evolves, some of the things that we've sought further clarity on is, for example, if somebody had a previous conviction, whether that previous conviction was for something as slight as a simple possession of cannabis or something more significant in the past, should that be a bar to them, no pun intended, acquiring a liquor license? And from our standpoint, because there's been no particular defined policy or guidance on the point, we've tried to work with everyone that's come before us, looking at whatever your past was is your past. We're more concerned with your present and your future. And that's how we've tried to approach things. However, there have been entities or individuals who have come before us, made certain applications, made certain representations, particularly under oath, and then have not been honest in the way that they've approached things. That type of character fault, I would say, is something that we don't necessarily look well upon, because it's a trust issue in terms of how we develop going forward. So in terms of the incorporation standpoint, if you are making swizzle, for example, as I said, there are ways in which you can make swizzle which the product will not be pasteurized. If the product's not pasteurized, then there could be certain risks in terms of sell-by dates, depending on what kind of fruits, juices, etc. you're utilizing to make the particular product. And so, for example, if I was to get sick having consumed a product that didn't have any particular sell-by date, or the bottling wasn't of a sufficient quality or standard, I may seek to then take legal action. Now, because in the past we don't have a plethora of cases like that, one may say, do I really want to take the risk of incorporating or incur the cost of incorporating versus that minimal risk that may come my way? And that's really going to be down to a business concern. Sorry, I see some more questions flying through. The only thing is just the box is a bit small. Just forgive me for a second. Mr. Santucci, you have to work on this. Yeah. What is the difference between a limited and general partnership? And can you have a partnership without involving a lawyer? So, I mean, realistically speaking, individuals can create contracts on their own accord. You don't need a lawyer to create a binding contract. The question is whether or not it's actually binding and not subject to the language. But a partnership does keep a degree of responsibility on the individuals. An incorporated entity is something that's going to have its own separate legal personality. And so that separate legal personality becomes a buffer, so to speak, where in Bermuda, directors are not going to be held personally liable unless you can establish some kind of malefice. Without going too deep, effectively, the company can incur hits while the individual may not. So what does that mean? If you had a particular swizzle product, if you sold the product, I got sick and I sued, I'd be suing a company versus a person. If I'm suing a company and I was successful, I might take all of the assets of a company, which might just be a computer. If I'm suing a person, if they have a bike, a car, a house in their name, then I have a lot more assets to pursue to satisfy my particular claim, if that was answered. And so in terms of a partnership, partnerships are really just going to be down to the individuals. And so individuals are going to be exposed a bit differently than an incorporated entity. So hopefully that answers that particular question. Forgive us as we move on. Let's see. I'm just trying to figure out how to actually view some of these comments a bit clearer than what we currently are working with. So I do apologize about that, as I'm at my friend's office utilizing his ancient machine.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Chelsea from the BDC. I just wanted to hop in and let you know that you can make the chat box bigger.
Okay, so I'm trying to just get the question box bigger.
Yeah, so you'll see a little arrow icon where it says questions. Yes. If you just click that, it'll make it bigger for you.
On this screen, it's not particularly big. That's the only challenge. While I can see one particular question coming in, thanks to COVID, more businesses are no longer using physical locations. Would the authority entertain an application where the business wishes to store its products at the residential premises? Yes. So to answer that a bit more deeply, I'll use, for example, an existing business. There's a company called Nine Parishes. Nine Parishes has they actually made application through the former regime, and they were subjected to a significant amount of scrutiny. Now, that particular business model, the proprietor behind that business, I think he's had some advertisements in relation to how he makes his product. You'll see all the different vats and the technological bottling and everything else that he operates. I think it's been on Facebook and some other social media platforms. But effectively, that is conducted inside of one of his premises. And so the way that it was approached was to have a very clear delineated space between a garage area that was turned or transformed into a processing plant and his house. And so one of the dynamics is that you can't just have individuals coming in and out. There were certain restrictions that were placed by the authority. And so without going through all of his personal particular matters, we certainly would use that as a kind of standard, though, looking at how we go forward. So there are other applicants who have sought to utilize their premises, whether it's commercial premises or residential premises, for either making products or storing products and then selling products from therein. And so we'll have certain criteria in relation to that, but that's definitely an option that we would look at. We have to be nimble with the times, and we want to make sure that there's opportunities for individuals to do what they feel best. So yes, we certainly would entertain an application where an entity wishes to sell a product from home. And then also there are going to be other kind of mechanisms in which to distribute the product. So whether you have a particular van and you can do everything in-house, or whether you're going to actually utilize other services. So for example, there are some Class A holders right now where I might bring in a particular product from overseas. And if I brought in a particular product from overseas and I have a deal with a Class A license holder that wishes to hold the particular product and sell the product, whether you go into the Class A license holder's establishment or whether you purchase it online and have it delivered, those are all options that are available. Sorry, I see I think more hands raised. I just want to make sure I'm able to go through this properly. With any other particular questions flowing from that? And so, for example, one of the other things that we've had to deal with is looking at some of the opportunities for those who do have certain businesses and structuring businesses in a certain way. So under the former regimes, you could only really have one type of license operating at once. So if you were a Class A license holder, you were only allowed to have your product and then sell it so that it was taken off site, so that there was no consumption on property. But the Learned AG has obviously seen where there were some gaps in the system and created other mechanisms like special event licenses to try and navigate around that. So that's why you'll have certain establishments that just sell alcohol that's meant to be taken off property for consumption have actually enabled consumption on premises under the guise of a special event license. So there are those kind of mechanisms as well. And then there are also other kind of dynamics in terms of tourism licenses, where if individuals can try and push and promote an event specifically under a tourism product, and then you can get a bit more scope in terms of the length of the license and its duration than you would under just an ordinary special event license. Sorry, I think I'm now seeing some more questions come up this way. Okay, just bear with me for a moment. So one of the questions I see being posed is, how can we make the process of incorporating companies easier for entrepreneurs? So that one's not going to be within my particular remit. Ultimately, the process between registrar of companies and what all corporate attorneys have to go through is pretty much standardized as is. So in terms of the cost, the process, the duration of time, etc., that's really going to come down to the individual corporate attorney's ability and way in which they work with clients. Another question is, how difficult is it or expensive for a SMB within Bermuda to incorporate their venture? So again, I hope I answered that earlier in terms of the cost. You're looking at under $5,000, I would say, is a fair starting point for the incorporation from the onset. And then every year there's going to be annual fees associated with it. But again, it's also down to mitigating any potential loss, liability, lawsuit, etc. And then also in terms of just how certain partnerships are structured. I do see the benefit in incorporating businesses, especially when you want to grow larger. If you're looking to just do something relatively small, if you're looking to just kind of get off the ground and get a feel for things, it's not necessary with all business ventures to start with an incorporated model. But ultimately, as one grows, as there's more responsibilities, as there's more assets, there can be more risks associated with it. So we would certainly encourage you to get independent legal advice on that particular regard as to the specific nuances of your business. In terms of seeing another question of how long does it take to hear back after submission of liquor license application? Okay, that's a great question. So for us, typically the process is, and we've worked we try to be as nimble as possible. We will have an application that is received electronically, typically by email. There may be some kinks in the application. Sometimes individuals might have further questions. Where possible, I am pretty much in court every single day, but where possible, I try to look at each email that comes into our administrator and give feedback so I can try and give guidance so that a proper application is completed and submitted on the first go. And so basically what will happen is that there's a gazetting period. So an application is filed 14 days thereafter. Well, immediately we would put it in the Royal Gazette for advertisement. This way, the reason why we put in the Gazette is because there is an opportunity for individuals, those who are residents within a particular demographic or space from the proposed business to make the opportunity if they wish to object. And that comes down to not just an application, but let's say ancillary products. So if you're a restaurant and you have an outdoor dining area, you might apply for an alfresco dining license. If you were a restaurant, you might apply for a catering license. And for the most part, if you've got the license, we're going to look at it in a very positive way to say, if you've made the application, we'd like to support you and give you what you want. However, there always is the opportunity for people to object. And when people object, there would have to be a contested hearing on the matter. So the way that we structure things is we receive the application, we immediately put it out to be gazetted. Once the parties internally, in terms of the authority, have had an opportunity to just look at the application, make sure that everything looks pretty sound. And then that application also gets filed with the police. Then there would be, from the time of the gazetting, they would set 14 days thereafter for a hearing to be fixed. That hearing would be the opportunity to make a presentation, describe what kind of business you're looking to promote, describe the nature of all of the things that you're looking to do, the location. We often ask for individuals to come equipped with site maps, photographs where possible, etc. But thereafter, what we have to do is look at premises and do site visits. So we will actually go out to various locations, whether they're in St. David's or Dockyard, and then just look at the suitability of the location. Primarily, we're going to look for things like, do you have cameras? If we're looking at physical establishments. And this would even be for an individual. Remember, there was a question about using somebody's residence. So if you were using a residence, and let's say you had a particular studio apartment, for example, that you wanted to transform and outfit into some kind of storage facility or delivery service facility, or from making particular alcohol, such as swizzles, because there's a distinction that has to be drawn between distilling certain liquor. Right now, our law has not caught up where we can actually create, quote unquote, alcohols in Bermuda. So I can go into that a bit further if anybody has any questions. That would fall under the Spirits Act. And so there's a particular product, for example, it was in the press, called Bermuda Gin. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's sold now in most of the outlets, Class A licenses, grocery stores, etc. And they wanted to do it in Bermuda, but they couldn't distill the products here in Bermuda because of the legal limitations. So just moving on with that, we would look at cameras. Do you have cameras set up? If you do have cameras, what kind of quality cameras? Are they cloud-based cameras? How long do you keep the footage for? And there's a lot of reasons for this. It's not because we want to be invading on your privacy. We don't need to have a direct link to it so that we can somehow monitor things at all times. That's not our focus. Our focus would be, for example, and let me just think more from other establishments that may have made the news, to use that as a kind of, so there are some sporting clubs, for example. At some sporting clubs, there may have been antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior would be one of the indicators as to whether or not we would consider granting further licenses, right? If there's more than just antisocial behavior, but some serious criminality going on, that obviously can impact an application or have conditions attached and different things like that. Those cameras, though, are a double-edged sword. They can also be used to try and defend a particular business, and saying that they've done everything right, that they've had security, that they've done all the steps that would be required in law and policies to make sure that they're operating right, so that there should be no heavy-handed approaches taken away from them. It's also designed to mitigate loss, because obviously we don't want minors being able to access alcohol. So, for example, when we look at premises, we're going to look at, do you have locks on doors? Obviously, I know that might sound very silly, because nobody wants to just lose their product and therefore lose their money. But those are the kind of things that we would certainly want to make sure are in place so that we can exercise that degree of protection for our citizenry. So in terms of going back to that question about determining what's the right structure, again, we're more interested in how you actually want to get your product to market, and how you plan to deliver it and provide the service or the product, more so than how you're structured. Now, in terms of how long does it take to hear back from the authority, now that always will vary. So for example, we've had applicants that have come before us and they've made the application, there haven't been any objections. And then the questions that we'll ask are like, what's your status with cameras? What is your status with tips-trained individuals who are going to be present at all times when the product is being sold or the service is being delivered? What is the status in relation to the premises? Are they fit for the purpose that's been intended? And sometimes we'll have individuals that'll say, well, listen, we're doing renovation work right now. We're still installing tables, chairs, we're still constructing the bar. And so we'll say, listen, we're going to hold off on doing a site visit because obviously we want to see the property when it's nearly ready for providing the product or service. And nowadays, because I think pretty much since last summer, once kind of COVID kicked in, you know, we've basically invited, and we do this at all the application hearings, we invite parties now to take video footage, camera footage, and basically walk us through the premises, because this way we can get to it. Let's say if you send us an email with all this kind of material, we can review it independently. We'll have our bi-monthly meetings. So as an authority, we'll meet twice a month to discuss any outstanding issues, make sure that we're trying to process everything that's been submitted to us in as timely a manner as possible. Because as you may appreciate, the role legally requires a lawyer to chair this. And as I said before, we have a great team, all with various skill sets, but all of some very busy individuals. So having the opportunity to look at things online is very helpful. But even when we haven't, we've gone to site visits. We tend to do it as quickly as possible once the premises are fit and intended for business. I see another question that says, if a business wanted to conduct business overseas, what are some of the legal considerations they should consider? Okay, so obviously I can't give advice on any US, Canada, UK law, anything outside of Bermuda. But ultimately speaking, Bermuda serves as a great business model, arguably for trust and taxation purposes. Not that we're a tax haven. I know that this is recorded, so I want to make sure that's clearly declared. But with respect to doing business overseas, if, for example, you were doing business overseas in the United States of America, you should get tax advice, because if you're going to be sending products overseas, which is great, we would love to see more businesses expand beyond the local market and start pushing internationally. There certainly will be tax consequences associated depending on where you're operating out of. So that's something that would require a little bit more nuanced advice than I think I should try and delve into at this particular time. But needless to say that you can certainly expand and should look to expand products and services internationally. And now that we're moving forward, I know that the BDC has looked at online business models, and for time has tried to query how do we push and support more online business activity. And I think we're finally, because of the current circumstances, being forced to consider that more diligently. And I think we're going to really benefit from it in that regard. Thanks to COVID, yes, I think I've covered that one. Just bear with me for a moment to make sure. I think the minimum prerequisite to establish an incorporation, I mean, that's going to be predicated on the information you're providing and costs. I'm not sure what more I could go into from there. But what is the process to change the law to allow distilling? Yes, seems like this would be a great opportunity to create jobs. And this would be great to create job opportunities for Bermudians. We wholeheartedly agree. So just to put it out there, historically, we're aware of, individuals who would have made, let's say, loquat liqueur. All right. Now, technically speaking, individuals may still do that right now. They would be acting outside of the law. In my capacity, I can't say that I've seen anybody hauled before the courts for making loquat liqueur. However, if one was making loquat liqueur, distilling that product, bottling the product, and then selling it locally without having any kind of either approval from the authority, then there certainly would probably be some recommendations for that person to go before the court and answer to that, because it is unlawful to do so. We have engaged with the AG pretty consistently throughout the time that we've been here. I think our period expires in May of this year, so subject to the desire of the AG if we were to continue or not. But we do have a bunch of recommendations that we've put forward. So we've had a good opportunity to see how things are growing on the ground. There are a lot of different things that are obviously being canvassed. A lot of legislative changes are in the works. And so it's really going to come down to the prioritizing of the recommendations we put forward and the changes to the distilling. So that's not something that we can force or push, but we certainly have had a conversation with the AG's chambers, and I think that they're aware and they've contemplated this issue. And I'm not sure of any particular time frames that have been given to us, but I do know that the AG wants to bring all of these products and services forward and really make it as much economic opportunity as possible for our people. So I can only encourage more patience in that regard. But right now, we don't have definitive answers as to when that will take place. But I think all things being equal, I think in relatively good order, maybe it'll be this year, or certainly by next, I think, we'll look at some of those changes and have more opportunities to be available. So I think just looking at some of the questions, I think that covers the questions that have been posed so far. If I have missed a particular question, please feel free to send it in, and we'll try and address it with the remaining time that we have. But otherwise, in terms of looking at, what license would cover import, distribution, and sale? Yes, good question. So there are different ways. There are different ways within which applications are made. So, for example, we do have bonded warehouses. Bonded warehouses are utilized typically by those who are importing as wholesalers with a view to selling products on to retailers, even if they have within their own corporate structure retail elements. So there is a particular license for that. The importation, distribution, and sale, again, it comes down to how you want to word it. So if you look at, for example, a Class A license would enable you to sell a product where specifically consumption is not intended to take place on the particular premises. So using a grocery store as an example, using one of the liquor stores as another example, or even I think now, I'm not sure if they're set up yet, but when I was making a reference to popsicles and different things like that, I know there's Dutch Pops. Dutch Pops came to us, they made an application, they have a Class A liquor license, which would enable them to have their product, which they make in Dockyard. And when I say make, it's somewhat like Swizzle. You're using distilled rums, etc., vodkas, whatever, that are already able to be purchased and utilized, and then combining them with fruits, fruit juices, etc., and making the product. That only requires a Class A license. That individual can then take their product, sell it from Dockyard, sell it in the Washington Mall, and if they wish, then distribute it across the island accordingly based on any orders that come in. If you wanted to have a bar, for example, that's a Class B license. So their hours of operation are limited, different times, etc., different days of the week. So Sundays are still prohibited with respect to bars, not restaurants. So those are things that we're looking at, like trying to make some changes in terms of how these things work. But as it stands right now, there's certain licenses. So depending on what the particular business model that you're looking for, I would simply just say send in a request to kscott@gov.bm. Mr. Kenneth Scott, that's our administrator. He would then take any particular requests, emails, etc., circulated amongst the team, and from there, we would canvass things, make sure that everything works with the law, and then when we can give any guidance, give the guidance that's appropriate to try and help a potential applicant get off the ground and get moving. So yeah, I think that, yeah, we're still on that last question. So please, if there's any more questions, just try and fire them off so that we can answer any particular concerns or issues that you have. And like I said, even outside of this particular webinar, if there's anything that you wish to get specific guidance on, you can do so privately, appreciating that, you know, some people might want to keep their cards close in terms of the potential business ideas and concepts. But generally speaking, we've seen certain things like dynamics with, let's say, mobile bars. You know, how would that work? How would that setup function? Or, you know, if I'm a promoter and I want to have, I want to acquire certain alcohol products and then have the products to be sold at different events over a period of time. You know, all of those different things we can look at in terms of different licensing regimes. But the creation of the special event license has been utilized to really give, whether it's one-time or even established businesses, different flexibility to working outside of the norms or restrictions that they've had in the past. So while there's just a slight break in some of the questions, I note that the time's about 1:07, so we still have a good 20 minutes left. I would invite Mr. Santucci to give any commentary that he wishes to address, certainly as it relates from his role from CADA, specifically, because one of the things that we do ask for, it's really enshrined policy, but in terms of looking at having individuals that are TIPS trained and certified when it comes to the sale of products. It's something that's really important and has been considered by legislation for quite some time, but we want to make sure that always keeping in mind that notwithstanding there's an economic opportunity, we're still dealing with a legalized drug and a very potent one at that. So we always want to make sure that there's good responsibility. And that's why we look at the fit and proper persons, and we look at all the kind of details in terms of locations as well as premises, as well as the purpose of the business and so forth. There's also concerns that we have because we see things like underage drinking, and we're always mindful of trying to mitigate that. Obviously, we are always challenged with drink driving. That's something that we haven't progressed as a society yet to, let's say, some standards in England where, for example, people literally are like, are you driving and you've had a drink? Are you crazy? Whereas here it's like we're still in the zone of trying to say like, well, you're not having another one. But those are the kind of things that we want to try and work with more so the business partners in terms of how to make sure that they're governing their business model accordingly and making sure that they fall into certain regimes. So we've also looked at, for example, the prospects of having like kind of a good corporate citizen in the alcohol realm going forward. So these are the kind of recommendations that we've looked at in terms of how licensing is done, whether there are fee structures and changes that can be considered for those entities that find themselves to be doing everything right and making sure that they're able to mitigate risks versus other entities that have been somewhat problematic in the past, even though it's not always easy to pinpoint certain degrees of fault. But having said that, let me just turn the attention to my colleague, and we'll keep an eye out for any further questions that come in as we talk.
Thank you, Chair. I see we managed to get the question mark sorted out. It's fine. Thank you for attending the webinar today. Really just a quick update on TIPS, Training Intervention Procedures, has been in effect in Bermuda for 11 years now. As a result of COVID, we now actually provide that training online through a webinar. And as when people call in or email into CADA, I try to encourage them quite frankly to go to the webinar for no other reason than there's just what I like to call immediate gratification by doing the webinar. By going to the webinar, it's still the first Tuesday of every month. It starts at 6 o'clock. And basically what I mean by immediate gratification, we will share the manual with you prior and tell you to specifically study certain pages, i.e. 12 and 14, which are the pre-test and everything in bold. But when the trainer comes online at 5:45, she's going to go through the exact same questions. If you have spent the time studying the program, and by about 8:39 at the very latest, you'll be actually finished the entire program. Benefit of doing it online is when you go and you do your test, You hit submit, you get your results right away. Not only will you get your results right away, and assuming that everybody passes, that you pass, you would also get a TIPS certification of completion and an online TIPS card. This simply means that you would have went, you would have did the pre-test work, you would have taken the test, you will, at the end of the test, you'll get your TIPS online version of your card. And that'll allow you to apply for your liquor license effectively right away. Sometime in a not too distant future, I don't know if this whole process to a large extent is going to be going online, so that'll make it that much easier. So training intervention procedures, i.e. TIPS, done online the first Tuesday of every month, will allow you to get that information or that certification right away. It lasts for 3 years. Like everything, it expires, and when please remember you need to recertify prior to expiring, and that makes sense. With the webinar, you don't have to take it months in advance. Those that still need to do a classroom test, certainly they're still available. However, that will go back to the original process of coming in, doing the test in class. Then those tests will be tabulated, coordinated, and mailed to the United States. And it usually takes 4 to 6 weeks to get them back. In reality, the webinar, you'll get your TIPS certification right away, and you'll actually end up getting your hard copy within 2 weeks. So certainly training intervention procedures online is a lot more efficient way to actually get your results. And if you really don't want to blow up the process of getting a license, and many people in reality apply for the liquor license, say, oh, I'm gonna wait till I get my liquor license before I do my TIPS program. Well, the reality effect is your liquor license will be held up because you didn't have your TIPS certification. So I always encourage people to go online, get the certification. It's really, for the 3 years, it's $27 per year for 3 years. So it really is an terribly inexpensive proposition. Remember that this license at this point in time is subsidized by the DNDC, which is i.e. government, so that the cost can be attractive so that everybody can actually take the course. In terms of new potential legislation, high on CARTA's particular radar is social hosting legislation, which goes specifically back to underage drinking. The chair talked about that a bit. Really, that's critically important to us, that we try to keep alcohol out of the hands of people before the legal age of consumption, keeping in mind that science says that any individual that consumes alcohol before the age of 14 is 4 times more likely to become addicted to alcohol and drugs. So it's really, our focus is obviously being as creative as we can to get these licenses in your hand, but at the same time making sure that we keep alcohol away from underage kids, and that's critically important to us as well. So don't forget training and defense procedures. New legal legislation would be social hosting, and that's sort of where we are going at this point in time. I don't see. Did you get that question, Chair? What license will cover import, distribution, sale? And I think that's pretty much about that. Nobody wants to talk about TIPS, Chair. But that's okay.
Very good questions. So just keeping an eye on questions. So in terms of looking at our role, obviously our role is very much administrative. So we're not here to try and judge particular concepts. We have, let me qualify that. We have had applications where, let's say, for example, with names, we've queried right off the bat, why would somebody want to name a business with that particular name? And so we've had quiet conversation with applicants to just really invite them to reconsider some of the ways in which they try and promote themselves, or what kind of names they give themselves, etc. Okay, here's a question as well in relation to provisional licenses. So provisional licenses, I think there's a bit of a misnomer in relation to what the provisional license enables. Provisional licenses are something that can be given when a business is in motion. So let me just try and see if I can pull up the specific language. I don't want to take out of time. But a provisional license is being given to an entity which is basically nothing in transition. They are not yet ready to get a full license so that they can sell products, but they want to move within time frames where they want to get things established. So they could say, listen, this is where my shelving is going to be. I want to put up particular alcohol in these locations. If I can have a license right now that enables me to start stocking shelves, bringing products in, importing products if that's what I'm working with, so that I can meet other timelines. So for example, we had the duty-free shops down at the airport, and they had certain timelines in terms of getting off of the ground. Obviously, the airport had an opening date, and so from a national interest perspective, the airport wasn't really intended to be open without restaurants, bars, etc., all functional. But at the times that we were being invited to look at the particular locations, there were still beams that were exposed. There was, it was still a construction site. And so for the purposes of, let's say, with working with duty free in terms of trying to get to the bonded warehouses and having shipments coming in, to say, yes, I am an applicant, I do hold this particular license, or I'm in a position too soon offer these products, here's paperwork that demonstrates that I'm working towards that particular goal. That's the kind of structure that we would look at a provisional license for. It's limited in that regard. It's not a kind of halfway measure that says, well, I don't have my tips, I don't have my cameras, I don't have other functional aspects of my business organized, but hey, I bought some liquor, can I at least sell some of it while I'm getting things in order? That's not the kind of mindset. So I'm just going to pause while the sirens pass. Yeah, so, but I'm not sure how many individuals would have seen, but when Gosling's on the junction of Front Street and Queen Street was looking to make renovations, they had another premises kind of towards Cafe Cairo, the Swiss Timing, I think, Jewelers, etc. I don't have the number committed to memory, but they wanted to utilize another premises so they weren't losing out on particular sales while they were going through certain renovations and then trying to set things up. So in between, we gave them the provisional license, which would have enabled them to then start getting things in motion, to start stocking shelves and getting things in order while trying to limit the disruption to the quote-unquote business they were going through. So that's kind of the ethos behind it, but it's not something that is particularly relevant to, I mean, for a new entrepreneur, a new business that's getting set up, we're going to want to see that the property that you have is ready to go. And once it's ready to go, we can say yes. If you're about 90%, so to speak, you might say we've got one or two little things here to kind of organize. We can say, okay, we'll sign off on this. You know that there's a condition precedent that you have to have these doors locked, or you have to have certain things in place. For example, you might have an entity that's spent money on some cameras, and they say, we've got all these cameras here, but we actually don't have like one or two outside. We're going to need to get some things going. We would say, okay, as part of the condition, we'll allow you to set up operations, provided that you make sure that cameras are installed in these particular locations. So we always try and work with parties to get ahead of the curve so that nobody's really suffering, because we understand that there's a business cost and individuals are undertaking risks to venture into these kind of businesses. And of course, they want to see returns. So that would be one of the criteria that we would consider when looking at provisional licenses. I guess other things is that we haven't touched on other kind of business models, and that would be like itinerant licenses, which are like the food cart concepts. I think there was a moratorium at some point in the city with relation to further food carts, and I don't think we've seen an explosion of them, but there have been some purchased and utilized at different locations. And so let's say, for example, I had a pizza oven place, or I had a Mexican taco cart, or some other kind of Vietnamese wagon that I wish to cart around and take from St. George's to Dockyard to town, to go to special events, to post up after a nightclub on a particular occasion. There may be applications that can be made for special event licenses, and that can also give not just the itinerant license, but special event licenses that can go beyond certain time frames. So for example, individuals, if you think of when we had Carnival and you had parties that were going on all night, under the typical rules and regulations, the laws, you would be prohibited from the sale of alcohol after 3 a.m. Now, with the special event license, we were able to create opportunities where you could continue to have like those kind of sales going on. Other things people might not know is that tour boat licenses actually have already 24-hour liquor licenses. So a tour boat could function for 24 hours a day with the sale of alcohol if they so chose. I know that's not typically the business model, but in terms of looking at opportunities, there are certainly entities on the water that would look for those kind of things. Now, that being said, of course, the water does open itself, so the tour boats are scrutinized quite considerably to make sure that all their safety equipment's in place, that they have the right personnel to the staff requirements, et cetera, and patrons, I should say, so that there's always eyes on deck, so to speak, to make sure that individuals aren't at risk of hurting themselves or having any accidents and the like, because typically, and I know there's been some changes to the approach with alcohol in the water. I think 2 days ago there was someone in court that was charged, and it's not often that you see individuals getting charged for drink driving on the water, but that's something that's certainly going to pick up in the future. But those are still opportunities to be considered going forward.
Operators now as the law being stated today,
yeah. So there is a certain dynamic which is being considered to make sure that the operators themselves are not getting away with a little drink here and there, as one may see in other establishments, without going any further. Beyond that, in terms of I think for the most part, members clubs, et cetera, there probably wouldn't be too many questions in relation to those entities, because it's pretty much established. They all know the processes and how they go through. But of course, that wouldn't stop new members clubs coming into existence. And members clubs, depending on the kind of social fabric, charitable elements, community elements, they do have the opportunity to have liquor licenses, which are quite robust and allow for a lot more. One of the challenges that we found is that, unfortunately, most members clubs today utilize alcohol as their kind of primary earning. And what we've always tried to do is encourage the members clubs to kind of get back to some of the roots in terms of the community building and programs as mechanisms for raising revenue, as opposed to trying to use the nightclub model just to facilitate income. But that being said, that's pretty much the extent of the types of licenses that we consider. It's the special event licenses, which are really going to be down to the individuals who are looking to create ad hoc events and offer different products and services. And then also looking at individuals who have established things. So, for example, if you were a bar and you had a Class B license, and you wanted to have a particular event on a day that's prohibited, such as Sunday, or beyond certain times, we've also worked with bars to make sure that they're able to have certain events. Let's say it was a Halloween event or other types of events which can go beyond hours. So we've really tried to be as nimble and focused on helping individuals where we can to make sure that they're able to get their ideas off the ground and see if they can grow them. And that's basically the view that we hold. Sorry, I just see a question coming in on a different mechanism, which I think is related to this. So forgive me. So correct. There's no, going back to the question on imports. So just to be clear, if I can go through in terms of the types of licenses, there is no specific license which is designated for the import of alcohol, right? So right now, I could make an approach without having a particular license to import alcohol. And so, for example, I might want to bring in a case of wine that I liked when I traveled somewhere. Fine. I might want to bring in crates of vodka. Now, when I bring in crates of vodka, subject to any other arrangements between companies and those establishments here on island, the next question would be most likely of customs is, what's the purpose of this? And that would be the question then that needs to be answered. Well, is it for my personal consumption? Might not get away with that one. If it's intended for sale, then there will be questions in relation to, do you have valid licenses and the like. So when looking at importing, make sure that you can vet potentially what you're looking to do with the authorities so that we can be aware of things, that if there were questions that were asked, if there's an application that was pending, we can render assistance in that regard. So hopefully that answers that particular question accordingly. And if not, for the individual that did ask the question, they can always drill down on me further at a later stage, as they seem to know my WhatsApp number and made it very quick. But all things being equal, hopefully this has been informative for many of you. And like I said, our doors are open with respect to any kind of new inquiries that you may have. There may be some inquiry in relation to a particular concept that is new, and that's something that you want to get some feedback on. Or even right now, for example, we have under all these guidelines, COVID everything, right? If you wanted to have an event and you had to have permission with the Ministry of National Security for certain numbers, certainly by liaising with us, not that we're trying to be the representation for applicants, et cetera, because our purpose is very specific, but we certainly are available to give the guidance. And I think that that's something that's maybe a bit more nimble under the new regime, where you've got multiple individuals that are all willing to offer their insight in various different dynamics as to how to help people get off the ground and create these kind of business opportunities. And so we really just want to see that where possible. Like, one of my biggest things, I think, is really trying to see how entrepreneurs can legitimate their products more than is currently at play. And the reason why I say that is because I just think, generally speaking, while selling a bottle or two here and there, or selling a few cases to friends can certainly generate some revenue, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to generate significant revenue in this particular space if the focus is there, and to think a little bit bigger than just the 9 parishes that we have. And that's not to draw a reference to another company, but by way of example, I know that they've been quite open in their approaches to try and get products overseas, and the BTA's been involved. Bermuda government's been involved. And so I think that where there's a willingness and a desire to try and take certain products and go on different levels, coming through the authority and legitimating the process will do us all well. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity. So hopefully this has been informative. And like I said, if there are any other questions that anyone has, please feel free to direct them to kscott@gov.bm, and those questions can be circulated amongst the team. And as stated before, I think that we're pretty prompt in addressing questions that come to us by email. And I've had individuals that have reached out to me basically via email to kind of get cursory legal opinions. And while I try not to get into the depth of creating any kind of memos for applicants, we certainly would give guidance where necessary. Like, that concept might not fly, you might want to consider this, or try to approach it from this perspective, etc. Because obviously we don't want to waste people's time. We want to make sure that if someone's submitting the application, that they're going to have the best shot of being heard and eventually moving forward with their products. Okay. That was it. So that was my closing speech. But yeah, I thank you all for your attendance today. And like I said, if there's anything else that we can do to try and assist you, please pass on the information. And if there's any recommendations that you feel as entrepreneurs, kind of either one, listening to this presentation, or two, having looked at the legislation that exists right now, or three, just looking at how things are being done in practice, and you feel that there's other models that should be considered, certain types of licenses that should be considered, even if it's by way of the fee structures, whether you feel that they're too cost prohibitive or whether they're not. From our standpoint, when you look at certain things, like let's say a hotel license, some of us may think that a hotel license is relatively inexpensive when you consider the type of volume that some hotels may generate from their alcohol sales. And you can just imagine, if you've ever been to one banquet or function, or just look at a regular Friday night happy hour, how much profit can be generated. But that being said, if there's any feedback that you have beyond this, please feel free to share it with us so that we can try and present things to the AG and see what changes can be made that are beneficial to our people. So with those comments being said, I would just like to say thank you on behalf of the Liquor Licensing Authority for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to thank all of the members at the BEDC, whom I have a great deal of respect for. And yeah, Mr. Santucci, if there's any final words that you wish to make, please.
No, just to reinforce your comments. We really are, we think we are nimble, and we're here to meet your needs. and that's probably what I want to say. We really are here to meet your needs. We're not here to make your life difficult. We want to see you be successful, and just tell us what you need. We only know, as the chair just said, if you got some new ideas, run it by us. We're not a panacea to everything. You guys are the entrepreneurs. We're just here to facilitate you getting to that point where you can bring your business to fruition, and you're providing sales and service of this particular product, alcohol, in a safe environment. I've got
So we